Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Olivia Cairns and I'm joined today by Marion Fellows from the Scottish National Party. How are you, Marion?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for inviting me, Olivia.
Thank you for coming. Turning to the Ukraine update, day 1070. Donald Trump's freeze on US foreign aid has left numerous Ukraine-based humanitarian projects without funding. Most of the projects have received an order to stop, a source from the US Agency for International Development's mission in Ukraine told reporters. Organisations in Ukraine that support veterans, local media and healthcare are among those to have had their funding curtailed by Washington, with many small local press outlets and aid groups announcing on social networks that they would have to close as a result. A number of Ukrainian and international NGOs said that they were affected by the freeze. Trump's Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Friday ordered a halt to virtually all US foreign aid except Israel and Egypt, and the Trump administration has put employees on administrative leave, accusing them of failing to comply with the order. On Monday, the EU extended its wide-ranging sanctions on Russia after Hungary stopped holding up their renewal and returning a declaration on energy security. This will continue to deprive Moscow of revenues to finance the war. Russia needs to pay for the damage they are causing, said Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief. The measures include the continued freezing of Russian central bank assets, the profits from which are being used to finance a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, backed by the G7. Legally, the EU's 27 countries must unanimously vote to renew the sanctions every 6 months. At the meeting of EU ambassadors, the European Commission satisfied Hungarian objections by presenting a statement declaring it was ready to continue discussions with Ukraine on the supply to Europe through the gas pipeline system in Ukraine. Asked at a press conference whether the statement actually meant anything, Kallas said, "Well, it meant something to Hungary, so that mattered." An overnight Russian air attack injured 4 people and set a private business on fire. Ukrainian officials said on Tuesday a 62-year-old woman was hospitalised and a 66-year-old man was injured when a Russian drone was shot down, damaging several houses. 2 women and 2 men were injured in Russian attacks on the forum of Zaporozhye in southeastern Ukraine. Russia launched 362 strikes on the settlements in the region over the past day. On Monday, a Ukrainian court sentenced a woman of the Kharkiv region 11 years in jail for aiding Russia and backing its invasion on social media. She has passed on information about air defence systems in the region. On Monday, a Russian court sentenced a retired teacher to 8 years in prison for criticising Vladimir Putin by calling him the head of a terrorist state and outlining allegations of atrocities by soldiers in Ukraine. Kostinian, 64, was found guilty of spreading false information on social media, a judge at Moscow electoral court ruled. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he and the French President Emmanuel Macron met and discussed security guarantees and Ukraine joining the EU while in Poland to attend the Auschwitz commemoration. European Council Chief Antonio Costa said that he met Zelensky on Monday for talks and avowed to the EU's steadfast support. A new school textbook that likens Russia's war to Ukraine to the Soviet struggle against the Nazis was presented in Moscow on Monday. Marion, what's your opinion on the Donald Trump freeze?
Well, I think it's pretty much what most folk here think. I think Donald Trump is a very dangerous man, and what he's doing is, as you have so rightly said, affected Ukraine to a huge degree, and only supporting Israel and Egypt is a crazy foreign policy for the US, but I don't know who can ever get Donald Trump to change his mind.
Thank you for that. Now shifting focus to the Middle East update. The death toll from the conflict in Gaza provided by the Palestinian Ministry of Health, which currently stands at 47,354, is probably an underestimate, a spokesperson for the World Health Organization has said. Israel has vowed to go ahead with its ban on the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, which has been told to vacate its headquarters in East Jerusalem by Thursday. The head of the body, Philippi Lanzari, told the UN Security Council that the ban was jeopardising any prospect for peace and security and harming the lives and future of Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory. Numerous US allies, including Jordan, Qatar, France, have rejected Donald Trump's proposal that people in Gaza should be moved from Jordan or Egypt. The Jordanian Air Force has begun delivering 20 tons of food and medical supplies to Gaza, a government spokesperson has said. The mayor of the southern Gazan city of Rafah, Ahmed al-Sufi, has urged residents not to return to its parts yet because it remains extremely dangerous, despite the start of the withdrawal of the Israeli troops. Israeli forces have detained at least 25 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank, including former prisoners, according to the statement of the Palestinian Commission of Detainees and Ex-Detainees. Israel has said it's continuing defensive operations in southern Lebanon following the extension of a deadline originally last Sunday for the withdrawal of its forces from the area. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, will travel from Dam next week to meet Syria's new government, according to reports. The trip would mark the first visit by a Russian official since the fall of Assad's regime. What's your thoughts on this, Marion?
Well, I mean, the fall of the Assad regime was wonderful. I mean, some of the stuff that regime terrorised, terrorising their own people was truly, truly sad. And it's worrying in a way that Russia is now moving forward talking to the new regime, because no one else has visited as far as I can remember. And I think it gives them a bit more status while the West tries to figure out exactly what is going to happen in Syria now. It's been a war-torn country for so long. It needs help, but I'm not sure that Russia is the best country to give it to them.
Thank you, Marion. Now shifting focus to Scottish politics, the Scottish Government secured an agreement to pass their 25-26 budget. The Scottish Government has secured separate agreements with the Scottish Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Green Party to support the 2025-2026 budget. Finance Secretary Shona Robinson has announced she will table amendments to the 2025-26 budget bill to allocate 16.7 million funding to bolster drug and alcohol services, including £1 million for specialist support for babies born addicted to drugs, begin a £2 bus fare cap pilot in one regional transport area, further strengthen support for hospices from £4 million to £5 million, increase nature restoration by £3 million to the highest ever level, invest in targeted support for the college sector and protect Crosford College, extend free school meal eligibility from S1 to S3 in 8 local authority areas for Scottish pupils in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment. Other flexibility for Orkney Island Council in terms of capital and resource funding. Ms Robinson said, "We are determined to deliver on the issues that matter most for the people of Scotland, and that is why the budget invests in public services and in eradicating child poverty, acts in the face of climate emergency and support jobs." The First Minister was clear that we would bring forward a budget by Scotland for Scotland, and the negotiations we have taken forward have been in that spirit. These additional initiatives demonstrate the value of a progressive approach and dialogue. During every stage of this process, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have encouraged our discussions in a positive and constructive manner. Through seeking compromise, I believe we are delivering a budget that will strengthen services and support our communities. With the agreements with these two parties now in place, this will secure a majority in Parliament in support of the budget bill. Marion, how do you think the budget will impact everyday Scots, particularly those in a cost of living crisis?
I think it's going to be much better for everyday Scots. Unfortunately, we're not independent yet. We don't have complete control. But the First Minister has made it very clear that tackling child poverty is his main aim, and it's going to be, what he is wanting to concentrate on. I think the work that they do, one of the amendments to the bill that you mentioned on further education is really, really welcome. I'm a former further education lecturer, so I really do have to declare an interest. And the fact that the college in Paisley, which was generally for people with special needs, is a really huge improvement, because once a college closes, once you lose that facility, it takes an awful lot more to bring it back again. I think the whole thing about the budget, and I think why this is important, is that with the help of the Greens and the Lib Dems, we're going to be able to move forward knowing where money is going to for next year, and to be able to spend it in the best possible way. The attitude of both Labour and Conservative parties is backward, retrograde. They don't want to acknowledge any of the good work that's being done, and they just want to sit and catcall from the sidelines, saying that they would do things differently but aren't prepared to negotiate with the government to get the budget through. That's how the Scottish Parliament was set up. The fact that the SNP have broken the rules, if you like, over the last 14 years and 21 years is to actually get a majority by themselves. It's not what was designed for the Scottish Parliament. And I think it's a more grown-up thing for parties to work together for the good of their constituents, the people that they actually represent.
Thank you, Marion. Now moving on to another major political story. Labour abstain in SNP WASPI Women's Bill vote. The SNP have accused Anna Sarwar and the Scottish Labour MPs of breaking their promises to WASPI women. The SNP say that Scottish Labour MPs have shown that they are incapable of standing up for Scotland. The comments came after the overwhelming majority for Scottish Labour MPs failed to vote for the WASPI Women Compensation Bill. Just 10 Labour MPs voted for the WASPI Compensation Bill, including just one Scottish Labour MP, Brian Leishman. Following the vote, which saw the Women's State Pension Age Ombudsman Report and Compensation Scheme Bill pass its first parliamentary hurdle by 105 to 0 as a result of the NSP and opposition party votes. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP called for the UK government to make time for parliamentary business schedule for the bill to progress. Commenting on SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP said, "After today's vote, it's clear that Anna Sarwar and Labour MPs have broken their promises to WASPI women and shown they are incapable of standing up for Scotland." Ahead of the UK election, Anna Sarwar promised he would stand up to Keir Starmer, but instead he has proven to be spineless in his silence, rolling over and rubber stamping every damaging decision from Downing Street, no matter the consequences for Scotland. Since the election, Scottish Labour MPs have voted to strip the winter fuel allowance from 900,000 Scottish pensioners, push thousands of Scottish children into poverty with the 2 children benefit cap, and now they are backing plans to block compensation for WASPI women. Despite the failure of Labour MPs to vote for the WASPI compensation bill today, it has passed its first hurdle as a result of the SNP and opposition party votes. Now the UK government must make time in the parliamentary schedule to ensure this bill can progress. Women born in the 1950s have been repeatedly promised compensation, and it's vital for justice and trust in politics that the Labour government now honour the promises they have made. Marion, why do you think Labour chose to abstain the vote today?
Because they were told to. That includes Scottish Labour, who are not under the remit of Anna Sarwar, no matter how much he tries to tell us that he's in charge of Scottish Labour and their MPs. They will simply vote how the whips in Westminster tell them. Labour have not got a good track record on WASPI women. back in the day when it first reared its head at Westminster, it was the SNP who produced a paper. Mary Black and Ian Blackford actually commissioned a report and found a way to pay the WSPI women what was due to them at that point. It was held back, and I remember feeling very, very surprised listening to the radio one morning to find a Labour MP on the radio backing WSPI women after Labour had done very little, and they continued to back WSPI women. As long as they were in opposition, they were prepared to say anything that they thought could gain them power in the end. SNP have been absolutely committed to helping WSPI women, as have other parties. And it's an absolute tragedy. And it's really strange because 99.9% of Ombudsman's recommendations are followed by the sitting government. And then in this case, the Ombudsman said that the WSPI women should get some compensation. Wasn't really a huge amount, wasn't enough for WSPI women, and I myself at one point said they should get at least £10,000 each. But now, because of this and the fact that the bill has passed its first stage, actually, I'm sorry to say, means very little, because unless the government allowed time and effort and give some effort to it, this bill will die on its feet without government backing. But they were very happy, each and every Labour MP at the time, and each and every cabinet minister were very happy to get the pictures taken with WSPI women talking about injustice, talking about compensation. And the minute they get into power, they have just broken that pact. I think it's abominable, and I'm really, really angry on behalf of WSPI women, many of whom I know personally.
Thank you, Marion. Now, it's been 5 years since Brexit, but where does Scotland stand today? SNP MSP Claire Adamson has led a debate in the Scottish Parliament today to mark 5 years since Scotland was forced to leave the EU, despite every part of Scotland and almost 2/3 of Scottish voters voting to remain. Since leaving the EU on the 31st of January 2020, Brexit has had a hugely negative impact on both Scottish and UK economies. The UK Government's Office for Budget Responsibility expects the UK GDP to be 4% lower in the longer term because of Brexit, with reports estimating a loss of £2.3 billion in revenue for Scotland every single year. Both exports and imports will be around 15% lower in the long term than if the UK had remained in the EU, with the increased cost of importing and exporting products. UK insurance premiums have skyrocketed, with car insurance in the UK up by 34% between 2022 and 2023, compared to just 2% in France and 5% in Spain in the same period. Despite the evident damage caused by Brexit, the move is now backed by all Westminster parties, including the Labour. The SNP say that the only route back to the EU for Scotland is with independence. Commenting, the SNP MSP Claire Adamson said, "This week marks 5 years since Scotland was dragged out of the EU against our will. After being told the only way to guarantee EU membership was by voting against independence. Brexit has led to lower trade and higher costs. In short, it has made us all poorer, and for no good reason. Despite the promises of Westminster parties, there are no free trade deals in the US or India, and the money on the red bus for the NHS has gone missing. The Leave campaign sold a fantasy, and Scotland is still paying the price. I am leading this debate because the damage done does not have to be permanent. I will always argue for Scotland to become an independent country and rejoin the EU as a full member state in its own right." Marion, 5 years on from Brexit, how further has Scotland been impacted the most? And do you think rejoining the EU is a realistic goal for Scotland?
I think rejoining the EU has to be a realistic goal for Scotland, and either whether we're independent or not. The fact that the Labour Party, the Conservatives, and now the Lib Dems, all the main Westminster parties, are absolutely against rejoining the EU. Is a farce. They know, as you said, that GDP is now 4% lower, prices are going up. They're not even, this Labour government is not even prepared to look at changes to some rules to benefit the young people, for example, so they could travel more freely in the EU. And they're just knuckling down because all the Westminster parties are really scared of reform, really scared that the idea has now got hold that being in a union, the European Union, is a bad thing. Earlier we talked about Donald Trump. Britain now has very little protection against Donald Trump, less than we would have had we stayed in the EU. If Trump does, as he's promised, increases tariffs, we're going to have it even worse in Scotland than the last time Donald Trump was in power. He put a 25%, I think it was, tariff on whisky the last time, and that's our largest export. I think it's going to be even worse this time, and we wouldn't have the backing of the EU to help us fight this iniquitous tariff. Apparently, Donald Trump and Sir Keir had a wonderful telephone conversation where they agreed about everything. Now, that's a whitewash job if ever there was one, or simply that Sir Keir didn't stand up to Mr. Trump and tell him like it is. Scotland, the UK are really going to suffer if the EU isn't our ally. And I think you'll find that more and more the EU are withdrawing things. And for some reason, successive UK governments seem surprised that the UK can't have its cake and eat it. They shun the EU, and bit by bit, the EU seems to be shunning them as well. And that affects us in Scotland, who have always had a more international outlook, and it just pays no respect to the fact that 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain. In the rest of the UK, the figures were wildly different. But Scottish people of all persuasions and all parties voted to remain. I think we saw, and having hundreds and hundreds of years under our belts of trading with Europe, I think we saw the benefits, and we didn't give in to the catcalls of the very few folk in Scotland who didn't want to stay in the European Union.
Thank you, Marion. Now, the UK has given more than £12.5 billion from energy bills to fossil fuel power plants in the past decade through a government scheme to keep the lights on during winter, according to a new analysis. The research found that since 2015, the government has offered contracts worth £20 billion through a capacity market to create a backup reserve for generators on standby, of which about 60% were fossil fuel power plants and a quarter were energy storage and power cable projects. This has included 90 gas power plants, which each clinched a contract of 15 years backed by a levy of consumers' energy bills. It could mean households will still be paying for gas plants in 2040, a decade after the government has promised to eliminate 95% of fossil fuels from the UK's electricity system. An annual capacity market auction sets a subsidy price to pay owners of power generators, including gas, hydroelectric, wind and solar projects, to cover the cost of meeting electricity demand. The UK offered the highest gas power payments in Europe. According to the report, which was commissioned by Beyond Fossil Fuels and found that in almost €53 billion, £45 billion, has been granted to fossil fuel plants through Europe's capacity market since 2015. The payments include contracts for almost 200 gas-fired power plants, some of which are new. Some of these new-build power plants will still be collecting payments by 2040, according to the research. Juliet Phillips, a campaigner at Beyond Fossil Fuels, said that the capacity market's payments to gas plant operators present a double blow for households. By adding billions of pounds to energy bills and keeping countries locked into a volatile fossil fuel market for longer. In light of this, do you think there are enough incentives for Scottish households to transition to renewable energy?
No. I think the idea that the Labour government, the present Labour government, are going to help Scottish householders with bills is is just for the birds, frankly. They got in July last year by promising to cut household bills by £300 per household. That's never going to happen. They're just following on from what the previous Tory government did, which is actually making it more difficult for people, renewable energy producers in Scotland. We have to pay to put our unused renewable energy onto the national grid. In the south of England, if you have a surplus, if you're a householder, then you actually get paid by the grid to contribute. The whole thing is lopsided. It's focused on the southeast of England and it's not focused on Scotland. GB Energy, which was heralded with much triumph and it would to be headquartered in Scotland, and it was going to be turning around producing all these additional jobs which would help the Scottish economy, has turned out to be yet another promise that Labour aren't going to keep, or if they are, it's going to be on a much, 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 much smaller scale. Again, we've cut ourselves off from Europe, and we're now fighting Europe, the EU, for energy across Europe and in other energy-rich places. It's an absolute mess, and at the heart of all this is the idea of cleaner, greener fuel. And that's not going to happen as long as we are doing these, we're involved in these capacity markets and topping up all of the gaps in supply by using fossil fuels. It is not where we should be, and it's definitely not where Scotland needs to be, because we have the resources. If only energy was not in the thrall of Westminster, we could do more to help folk in Scotland.
Thank you, Marion. Turning now to the mass concerns for security of Jews worldwide. Elon Musk's remarks to a German far-right party that Germans should not focus on their country's Nazi past should prompt deep concern about the security of American Jews and of Jews worldwide, a leading Jewish advocate has said. Speaking as a deeply concerned American Jew, said Hallie Soffer, Chief Executive of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, I am deeply concerned about security of American Jews, of Jews worldwide, given our president's clear alignment with dangerous far-wing extremists. Musk, the owner of Tesla, SpaceX, and X, and the world's richest person, donated hundreds of millions of dollars to Donald Trump's campaign and is now a close advisor with an office in the White House complex. In a video addressing to the Alternative für Deutschland AfD party on Friday, Musk said it was good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything. Said children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, let alone their great-grandparents, and said there was too much focus on past guilt and we need to move beyond that. He also gave 2 fascist-style salutes last week during a speech at Trump's inauguration. Soffer's response comes after world leaders marked their 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi death camp Auschwitz in Poland. Amid outcry over his salutes and his comments to the AfD, Musk has denied far-right sympathies while gleefully trolling his critics. On Sunday, he pinned to his X account in the Latin motto, Nemo me impune lacesste, no one provokes me with impunity, which Musk attributed to Sulla, a Roman dictator, but which is actually the national motto of Scotland. Marion, what's your reaction to Musk's involvement with a far-right AfD party?
I think you could call it unhinged fear. I watched that clip, and in the week of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, it seemed to be calculated. Elon Musk has tremendous power through his social media and through his wealth, and it is absolutely appalling that he can get away with doing that and actually calling down his detractors, of which I am definitely one. The idea that Jews should feel insecure across America, across the UK, and across the world is appalling, especially when you consider the Holocaust. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Elon Musk is a Holocaust denier. I don't know if he's actually come out and said that. But we all have to keep our past in focus as we try to move forward. The reason we have to do that is so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. After the First World War, one of the first things I learned in higher history was that the cause of the Second World War was the First World War settlement at the end of after the treaty that was signed in Versailles after the First World War. And because it was so punitive and harsh, Germany was kept subjugated for quite a long while, and that allowed the rise of Hitler. We cannot allow right-wing fascism back on the world stage. And the fact that Trump himself has never actually said anything about the Nazi salutes that Elon Musk gave at the inauguration is tantamount to complete denial of what is going on. It's really, really, and this is another reason I keep harking back to the EU. This is another reason why we need to have a strong Europe, united against the right and united for trying to stop further wars. We've seen what Putin has done. We cannot allow any more wars in Europe. We cannot allow the wholesale demonisation of immigrants. It bears absolutely, it's of no use to anyone. I was listening to a report this evening on news that was saying that without immigration, the number of working people in the UK, for example, will fall beyond an ability for those. There'll be more pensioners than people working, and that will mean that the standard of living of every member of society in the UK will drop. Even with the immigration we have, we are not decreasing or increasing the working age or diluting the number of pensioners. We need to sit down as nations and look at this in a sensible, forward-looking way. We cannot allow folk like Elon Musk to actually pander to the right, or even if he's not right-wing himself, and to allow the kind of things that happened in Germany in the 30s and 40s cannot be allowed to happen again in Europe.
Maintaining that focus on the US president, Donald Trump has repeated his suggestion that large numbers of Palestinians should leave Gaza for Egypt or Jordan, despite widespread opposition for the proposal from Palestinian leadership, the UN and US allies in the region. Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One on Monday night, the US president was asked about his comments over the weekend about cleaning out the Gaza Strip either temporarily or long term. Trump reiterated that he would like to get Palestinians from Gaza living in an area where they can live without disruption and revolution and violence so much. The remarks, apparently at odds with existing US policy and international law, have been widely rejected by the Arab world as a potentially fatal blow to the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but were embraced by Israel's right wing. Trump also said that he was due to meet his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu soon, amid speculation the longtime Israeli premier will be the first foreign leader to visit the White House during Trump's second term. When you look at the Gaza Strip, it's been hell for so many years, Trump said on Monday. There have been various civilizations on that strip. It didn't start here, it started thousands of years before, and there's always been violence associated with it. You could get people living in areas that are a lot safer and maybe a lot better and maybe a lot more comfortable. Trump said he has spoken to the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Jordan's King Abdullah on Sunday, and insisted that both leaders would agree to the plan. Abdullah also spoke on Monday with Trump's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but the issue was not mentioned in a State Department statement on the call. Both Amman and Cairo have been adamant so far that Trump's suggestion is a non-starter. For Palestinians, there's little faith in the idea of temporary relocation to allow for reconstruction, given a history of repeated displacements since the creation of Israel in 1948. 15 months of war have levelled 70% of Gaza's infrastructure and left the Palestinian territory 2.3 million population in the depths of a devastating humanitarian crisis. More than 47,000 people were killed before a ceasefire went into effect earlier this month, and about 90% of the residents have been displaced from their homes, some multiple times. The current phase of attacks in Gaza started after the Hamas attack on the 7th of October 2023, which left 1,200 Israelis and foreigners dead and another 250 taken into hostage. Marion, how damaging are comments like Trump's to the peace protest?
Just when you think you can't say anything worse, he does it. This is seen in context of how he supports Netanyahu and the right-wing Israeli government. It's really, really worrying, because if America is a big player in the Middle East, I don't know that the Arab world is going to take to Donald Trump. Many American presidents built strong relationships with the Saudis and other Arab countries. I don't think Donald Trump is actually going to do that. But for him to suggest that those people who have been through absolute hell since the war started in October, innocent women, children and men have been 47,000, a low estimate you said, have been killed in that time. I think it's abhorrent for him to have suggested this, and I don't know that Egypt and Jordan can stand up to Trump. I think they want to, but will they be able to? Will other countries stand up and say, no, this isn't going to happen. This isn't the way forward. The ceasefire and all that's happened since then, I called for a ceasefire in Parliament just in October, November, when the war started. And I was laughed at, as many of my colleagues supported that, and we were laughed at, thought of as being naive. But since then, as you've said, over 47,000 men, women and children have been killed. Asking a nation that has been brutalised the way that Palestine, the Palestinian nation, has been brutalised is absolutely ridiculous. Who's going to look after them? Which Palestinian can you find? What Palestinian can you find who wants to leave the country that they've lived in, worked in, and have held on to and held close since Israel was formed in 1948? There's always been difficulties in the Middle East. There will continue to be difficulties as long as suggestions like that from Donald Trump are given any credence.
Thank you, Marion. Shifting focus back to Scotland. The Scottish Government is funding a new approach which will increase the support and help provided to people leaving prison following a short-term sentence from 6 to 12 months for those who need it most, and will include men released from remand. Building on the strengths of the current services, the National Service will help people leaving prison reintegrate with their community and rebuild relationships through mentoring, one-to-one support and guidance on accessing healthcare, housing and benefits. This type of support can help reduce the risk of reoffending, contributing to lower crime while enabling individuals to build better lives for themselves, their families and their communities. Replacing the two existing services, Shine and new Roots for Men and women serving sentences for 4 years or less, the National Through Care Service will provide consistent support across Scotland, including in rural and island communities. Women released on remand already receive support, and the new national service will also extend this to men. Launched in April this year, the service is backed by £5.3 million for the next 3 years and will be delivered by a partnership of third sector organisations led by SACTO, a community justice organisation, with oversight by Community Justice Scotland. Justice Secretary Angela Constant said, "It is critical that those serving short sentences and periods of remand are supported when they're released to make safe transition back into the community. This reduces the risk of reoffending, resulting in less crime, fewer victims and safer communities." This approach, backed by £5.3 million in funding, will allow more people to be supported for longer, including those leaving periods of remand, many of whom are not eligible for support at present. Marion, what is your view on the Scottish Go's approach, reducing reoffending? Are they doing enough?
I don't think you can ever do enough unless you have all the powers available to an independent country. But I think the whole idea that you should lock people up in prison and throw away the key for minor offences is absolutely ridiculous. We've seen both right across the UK, in both the Scottish prison estate and in the one in England and Wales, how difficult it is when you keep sending people to prison for short periods of time, and all they do is sit in their cells for 23 hours a day, or are forced to be at the risk of overcrowding. Okay, money should have been spent by all governments over the years on building new prisons or making prisons fit more people. But that's not the answer. If you look to the Scandinavian countries, many of them don't actually imprison people or take them away from their family. If you take a man away from his family, then you start a whole new range of problems for society when he comes back. The fact that the Scottish Government is prepared to spend more money on people who have been on remand, because people can be on remand for months and months and months, and they need some coping mechanisms and ways of being able to return to the community, not having been in prison, learning a new trade or a new skill. In terms of talking to remand prisoners are kept separate, but if remand prisoners know other prisoners who have long careers in crime, shall we say, they learn far too much going forward, because when they return to their homes and families may no longer be there, the families may have moved away, these men are left and women are left groundless, and sometimes for them the only thing they want to do is to go back into prison where they feel safer and more secure. Firms like Timson's, who provide work to former prisoners, are to be really congratulated, because not everyone who goes to prison is a danger to society. They may have been foolish. Yeah, they may have been foolish, but they don't deserve to be punished for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Marion. Focusing on the Scottish House Condition Survey. The Chief Statistician has released figures on fuel poverty, energy efficiency, the condition of housing and other key descriptors of occupied housing stock in Scotland. This is the first release of information from the Scottish House Condition Survey for 2023. Fuel poverty. In 2023, an estimated 34%, around 861,000 households of all households were in fuel poverty. This is higher than the 2022 fuel poverty rate at 31%, around 780,000 households. 19.4%, or 491,000 households of the 861,000 households in fuel poverty were living in extreme fuel poverty in 2023, which is similar to the 18.5%, 465,000 households in 2022. In 2023, 56% of Scottish homes were rated EPC Band C or better under SAP 2012. This is an increase of around 3 percentage points compared to 52% in 2022. Under the SAP 2009, which allowed comparisons over a longer period, over half of dwellings, 61%, were rated C or better, up to 37 percentage points since 2010. In the same period, the proportion of properties in the lowest EPC bands E, F or G has reduced from 27% in 2010 to 8% in 2023. In 2023, 27% of all dwellings failed the tolerable standards similar to 2022, 29%. The most common reason for failure of the tolerable standard was under the satisfactory equipment for detecting and warning in the event of a fire criteria, which 562,000 dwellings failed. The Scottish Housing Quality Standard failure rate in the social sector was 38%. This has fallen from 60% in 2010. Overall, this is an improvement of 3 percentage points compared to 2022, when 49% of dwellings had despair to critical elements. The 2023 rate is the lowest since 2012. Commenting, Housing Minister Paul McLean said, "We continue to support vulnerable households within our limited devolved powers, including through our energy efficiency delivery programmes, Warmer Homes Scotland and area-based schemes. We recently announced additional funding of £41 million to help tackle fuel poverty, including £20 million through the Scottish Welfare Fund and an increase of £20 million to Warmer Homes Scotland scheme. This will help around 1,500 additional households to save an average of £400 per year on their heating bills. The number of homes failing the Scottish Housing Quality Standards has reduced from 60% in 2010 to 38% in 2023. However, the levers to make a real difference remain in the UK Government. We continue to urge the UK Government to introduce a social tariff mechanism, which is the best way to ensure energy consumers are protected against high costs and can afford all the energy needs." Marion, what more do you think has to be done to improve housing quality and affordability?
Well, I think your figures have proven, Olivia, that the Scottish Government has made great leaps forward, but energy is a reserved matter. So it's a lot, the stuff that you mentioned there about a social energy tariff, I wanted to sigh and weep a bit because I was introducing a social energy tariff bill in the last Parliament. Unfortunately, called a general election, and I wasn't able to bring it forward. And of course, as you'll be aware, I lost my seat. But it's not about me. A social energy tariff means that people can afford to heat their homes. It's already been estimated that thousands of people, especially elderly and disabled people, will die this winter because they can't afford to heat their homes properly. And that, in the 21st century, in a first world country, is simply unacceptable.
Thank you, Marion. The Scottish Government has said that lessons learned from innovative work with families in Inverclyde are helping deliver new approaches to eradicating child poverty. Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville will be visiting Home Start Renfrewshire in Inverclyde and Greenock tomorrow to see work funded over the Scottish Government's Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund, which is helping to reshape services locally and elsewhere in Scotland. The Social Justice Secretary will meet staff at the project as well as parents who have benefited from the work which focuses on providing early intervention to support families, particularly those with children under 5 and those affected by poor mental health. Learning from the project is something Inverclyde's Fairer Futures partnership, which is supporting local services to test and improve how they deliver services to promote family wellbeing, maximise incomes and support people towards education and into sustained employment. Miss Somerville said, "Eradicating child poverty is the Scottish Government's top priority and a national mission. I'm keen to hear more about how whole family person-centred support is being developed in Inverclyde through the Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund and the Fairer Futures Partnership. Through close partnership between Home Start and Inverclyde Council, this project provides holistic support so that families can maximise their household incomes and parents can improve their employment prospects through upskilling and volunteering. Putting this kind of vital support in place means that we don't just help families in a crisis, but enable them to thrive in the longer term. The Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund was set up to support local areas to test new ideas and innovate and improve local approaches to eradicating child poverty. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to learn more about how this funding is informing Inverclyde's overall approach to supporting families out of poverty." Do you have any thoughts on this, Marion?
I think it's a great initiative. I think often where you have small scale in one area initiatives, you can really look at fixing one problem by itself and pouring all your ideas and hopes and money into that one idea doesn't always provide the best results. I think something like this that looks at the whole families and actually encourage, and there's a bit of education there and a bit of extra money for children. I think that's the way forward, and I'd like to see that replicated across Scotland.
Thank you, Marion. Well, that's it for us tonight at Scotland at 7. Thank you to our guest Marion for your input tonight. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, I thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guest Marion. Goodbye and thank you for watching.